Thank you very much for having us here today. I'm going to try and share some perspectives at a broader view of what I think is going on in the commercial blockchain landscape and what it means to start or invest in blockchain projects today. And so what I'm not going to talk about is the 20 different supply chain use cases, but try to give some broader perspective of where I think the market is as a software market. So just by way of background, as Anastasia was saying, I'm involved in two big projects in the space. One is a company called ConsenSys. Who in here has heard of ConsenSys? All right, we're getting the name out. And the other one is the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. Who's heard of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance? All right, pretty good. Amazingly, not the entire overlap. Actually, slightly different hands went up each time. And so what that means is, I have the fortune of seeing a lot of activity in the space, and it gives me some ideas. So I'm going to spend just a couple of slides. Since there were some hands that didn't go up when I said, who's heard of ConsenSys, I'm going to do 2 slides on ConsenSys, and that'll sort of be a precursor to the type of work that we're doing on the rest of the presentation. So ConsenSys was founded by a guy called Joseph Lubin. Who's heard of Joe? Quick show of hands. Who was a co-founder of a project called Ethereum. Who's heard of Ethereum? Quick show of hands. All right. We're starting to get the hands up. Everyone's going to get lots of exercise in this session. Joe left the foundation just after the Ether token launch, but before the mainnet went live, with the ambition of building software on the Ethereum blockchain. And very, very broadly, our vision is to, in a nutshell, decentralize everything, right? Or to put it more philosophically, we think there's an opportunity using the Ethereum world computer and the principles of decentralization to build fairer social, political, and economic systems for the planet, and given the number of space projects coming at us, very quickly beyond the planet too. And so for us, Ethereum is an enabling technology of building decentralized platforms. Okay? Now, ConsenSys itself is a very decentralized organization, and we sort of operate in this virtuous cycle of, as one of our members says, build things that inspire more people to build more things, right? So we have a big focus on expanding the Ethereum ecosystem because we want to help the planet build better systems for itself. And the way we achieve that is by building blockchain projects, right? So, and more broadly, we actually do a bunch of different things that help us achieve that, right? So, which I'll talk about in a second, right? And so we also run this organization without a hierarchy. We had a flat mesh-like structure. And Joe's whole premise when he started the company was, I want to create an environment in which entrepreneurs and technologists want to build stuff. I don't want to tell people what to do, right? So we are an entirely self-organizing company that picks and chooses its own activities, builds consensus with a U around those activities, and then we go and fund it and do it, right? So this very self-reinforcing cycle of decentralization, which has allowed us to, which has had 2 effects. One is people have left large, more traditional organizations to join us because they find this very liberating. And second, it enables exponential growth. So I'm of the belief that most large-scale technology companies of the future will be highly decentralized, right? And we'll follow this mode because if you have a series of internal entrepreneurs who are each empowered to work on whatever they want, then you can grow really, really quickly. Okay. So today we're working on 40-plus blockchain platforms, 850 people in over 30 countries. We work with strategic clients. We work developing enterprise projects. We invest in token launch external projects. And we're involved in a series of industry consortiums where we run something called the European Blockchain Observatory. Eva's in the room somewhere, which is a European Commission project looking at harvesting and surveying and developing Europe's overall blockchain strategy through a series of workshops and project developments, et cetera. So we work on everything from building, next generation decentralized power plants to working with governments on blockchain strategy to making venture investments, et cetera, right? So we build products, we work with clients, we train people, and we invest. So what does this mean in terms of where I see the blockchain landscape today? I try and think about this space as a software market. As much as I try and think about the implications of decentralization, I try and think about blockchain as a software market, right? And we certainly have seen that there's these B2C use cases, whether it's Virtue Poker or Rare Art or CryptoKitties. And I think the B2B use cases are starting to become well understood, whether it's medical records, supply chain, trade finance, land title, digital asset creation. And then in this middle bucket, there's this interesting thing going on that really started to accelerate midway through last year, and crystallized towards December around this notion of the intersection of traditional capital markets and crypto capital markets. So there's been this ongoing theme that crypto markets are becoming increasingly institutionalized, and that makes it very interesting in terms of the software you need to write in order to support that, right? And then underneath these sort of application layer domains, whether it's B2C, whether it's on the trading side, or whether it's on the B2B side, are the tools, right? Whether it's the infrastructure, better VMs, development tools like Truffle, test suites, caching, identity, what have you. And then the tools you need next to the tools, right? Systems management, financial reporting, et cetera, right? So if you look inside of ConsenSys, you will find a roughly equal dispersion of projects across each of these 5 areas. And I'm yet to see a blockchain project that I don't think belongs in one of these 5 areas. And I'm quickly going to touch on each of the 5. So the B2C models are really demonstrating the potential reach here and reinforcing the concept of digital scarcity. I mean, who in here has a CryptoKitty? Okay, well, 2? So I don't know, who here has heard of CryptoKitties? Yeah, so CryptoKitties is the Victoria's Secret of Ethereum. Does anyone understand the reference, the Victoria's Secret of Ethereum? I'd expect one hand to go up in this. So Victoria's Secret broke the internet in 1996, right? They crashed the internet by live streaming a fashion show, and the internet stopped, right? And so the point is, things like CryptoKitties, and we'll come back to this shortly, these are big inflection points for the network because they demonstrate the volume of interest of people running applications on them. And the fact that the network broke, frankly, doesn't really matter because if you don't have people trying to run millions of transactions in production in a way that you didn't anticipate, you have no idea if your system's any good. Right? And so one of the challenges our competitors have that run these private-only implementations is they're never going to have a CryptoKitty moment, which raises the question, how much can you trust their infrastructure? Obviously, we've seen an explosive growth in the crypto assets, and Ethereum, whether you measure this by volume of transactions or value creation or what have you, there's now over 1 million transactions a day processing through the Ethereum network. The amount of money being raised through token generation events is in the billions, far exceeding the amount of venture going into the space. But just to reinforce that point of production, each day, $10 billion of digital assets settle on the public Ethereum network, right? And again, one of the things I challenge in some of our client meetings is, I'm not sure if there's another blockchain technology that has that degree of production-grade digital asset settlement actually going on. And if you're the New York Stock Exchange or a large-scale financial institution, I understand why you may not be that interested in the public blockchain all the time. But this is a really important figure, right? We have a huge amount of transactions really out running in the wild, right? And what's happening behind that, which is from a software development perspective really interesting, is this entire next generation of market infrastructure, right? Decentralized exchanges, liquidity pool discovery that looks more like BitTorrent than like a dark pool, right? Micropayments, bridging networks, asset tokenizations, digital-based documentation, workflows, all getting built behind the scenes to enable this to go from wherever we are, 600 billion, 700 billion, into the trillions and trillions of value, right? So there's an entire next generation of market infrastructure out there being built, right? And it's being built in production, right? It's being built with tens of billions of dollars clearing and settling each day on the public chain. So there's a really interesting set of applications to look at there, right? And so in parallel with this, it's starting to go mainstream and become institutionalized, right? When we're starting to see, when we ran our Ethereum conference in New York, the Daily Show was on stage with us, right? So we're starting to see this going mainstream, and I would argue that the Reuters survey that said 1 in 5 major financial systems is looking at trading crypto, based on the meetings I have every day, is massively underestimating the institutional interest in this space, right? Which then brings us to, so how do you approach this, right? When you start to see, particularly on the B2B side, when you start to see this mainstream interest, when you start to see what's going on the public chain, when you hear enterprises being so concerned with privacy and security and focused on the private chain, how do you think about what type of software to build and what type of projects to go after? So when we evaluate a project on the B2B side of our business, working with clients, we really try and position both sides of the coins. And what I mean by that is, blockchain for business and business on blockchain. So take KYC as an example. KYC in most financial institutions is deeply broken, right? How many people here have opened a checking account? You know, this is the exercise portion of the comedy routine. Some portion, how many people have then tried to get a mortgage with the bank that they have a checking account with, right? Okay, how fun was that, right? KYC is deeply broken, right? You continually resubmit, re-update documentation. You know, you have to, the processes change. In fact, they're inconsistent. It could be that your Amex card and your MasterCard from the same financial institution have different KYC processes. Oh, and by the way, I don't think there's a CIO in the world who thinks this is a good data strategy. You know what we should do? We should go get deeply private personal information that's regulated and we can be fined for disclosing, and then store 17 copies of it in 17 different databases, right? Not a good data architecture. So you can solve that problem by using a blockchain. Attestations that represent documents, signatures proving that they've been reviewed, having these stored in a wallet and then distributed, right? So you can solve the problem of KYC today through decentralization of blockchain. However, is that a useful use case, or should we be thinking about how do we put KYC'd identities tied to Ethereum addresses, right? How should we do pre-trade clearances for the $10 billion of digital assets that are settling every day on the global Ethereum blockchain, right? And so when we look at the B2B software side of this, we try to answer both questions with one solution, right? How do we solve stovepipe broken KYC, and as a byproduct of that, have KYC identities on blockchain, right? And sort of my view is the most successful blockchain B2B software companies will be the ones where their solutions addresses both of these questions, right? Which raises an interesting thought experiment. If you are running a blockchain software company, who is a better customer? Goldman Sachs or Coinbase? Right? Well, in the case of these two customers, probably either one of them are pretty good, but there are less sophisticated, less innovative investment banks than Goldman Sachs, and there are less commercially successful crypto companies than Coinbase, right? But the reason why I raise this question is it goes to the strategy of your company, right? It goes to how do you get technology diffusion and find early adopters. Now, both Coinbase and Goldman Sachs are relatively early adopters, right? One strategy for early adoption is go and take 100% market share in a small market and hope/help that market grow really quickly, right? And if that market does grow really quickly, you become the dominant player in a new market space. An example of that would be Cloudera and the Hadoop database going after social media and advertising technology, right? IBM and Oracle have roughly 0% market share of Facebook's IT spend, right? The cloud providers and the big data databases are the tools that they use. Now, if you made that bet in 2005, people might have called you crazy, right? Except for it would have been a really, really good strategy if you were trying to come up with a new database and you were trying to figure out a way to build a company as valuable as Oracle or IBM and you didn't want to compete with their sales forces, right? So you always need to look for where the early adopters are, right? And you need to think through whether this is Clayton Christensen's framework or whether it's the Geoffrey Moore frameworks or the other series of technology diffusion about where are you and where are the incumbents, right? And so if you look at where Ethereum is today, right, and this idea of technology diffusion, and there is no way I'm going to hit that little tiny Ethereum logo from here with a laser. You know, people are critical of these systems because they're slow, they lack data privacy, et cetera. I would argue that's irrelevant. That's entirely irrelevant because trying to build a cryptographically secure global transaction network with an Oracle database is going to cost you hundreds of millions of dollars. In IT licenses, the thousands of lines of code, how you're going to reverse fit something that was built for a different architecture into a new architecture, you're just not going to succeed, right? And so you're not going to create a global settlement system out of Oracle databases anytime soon, right? So the fact that Ethereum's a little bit slow is largely irrelevant, right? It's largely irrelevant because it solves for a much more complex and different problem, right? And if you look at Clayton Christensen's work and the work of these other academics, this is classic disruptive technology. You cannot do what the incumbent can do as well as the incumbent, but you can do something totally different in a way that the incumbent cannot do at all, right? And so that suggests that if we're at this stage of the market, and I think we are, that that actually the criticisms are largely irrelevant. And I would say better than that. I would say we have a very strong roadmap for solving the problems in the first place. Whether you look at the NTETH, the EEA specifications, whether you look at the sharding and the plasma strategies that are out there, we are at the point where data privacy and transaction scalability, while if not solved in code, have foundational architecture set. I would argue we're at the point that we have a dominant design, right? And that we're at the point where the problems may not be solved, but we can anticipate them being solved, right? They are intellectually, theoretically solved, if not physically solved, right? Which means that we're at a very different point in the ecosystem. So today, in the work that I do with our clients, and which tends to be a self-selecting pool anyway, but the work I have not seen a proposal from our organization for a pure POC go out in 6 months, right? Most of the projects, and at least the projects I get involved in personally, are all building large-scale, multi-jurisdictional, multiple-company production networks, right? So we have to ask questions like, how are you going to provide 24/7 always-on customer support for this network, right? We have to ask questions, how are you going to integrate this into our existing systems management software, right? So I would argue we're at the point from a point of technology evolution and architecture that while we may not yet have the physical implementation of Ethereum that does 10,000 transactions a second, we are getting very close to having systems that are capable of performing the majority of corporate use cases. Look, when we started the EEA, in one of the very first meetings, when we had all the banks in the room with all the software startups and Microsoft and Accenture and everybody, we asked the question, how many transactions per second do you need for a banking network? And one of the lead blockchain architects for one of the very large investment banks put their hand up and said about 200 transactions a second. With 200 transactions a second, you can achieve 80% of the capital market investment banking use cases, right? And we're already well beyond that. I don't know if anyone saw the South African Reserve Bank release that we put out last week. We were processing 70,000 transactions in 2 hours, right? We're already sort of at central bank clearing levels in these systems, and we have architectures that are going to take us well beyond that, right? So I'm going to close with, again, coming back to software markets. One of the defining characteristics of software markets is network effects, right? And the definition of a network effect in a microeconomic textbook is the following. It is a product where the marginal utility of the product increases with the number of customers, right? And the classic example is Microsoft Word. You buy a copy of Microsoft Word, you pay $50, and you can print a pretty document. Your colleague buys a copy of Word, also pays $50, and now not only can you each print pretty documents, you can exchange documents, right? And an entire law firm buys and standardizes on Microsoft Word, and all of a sudden they can create templates for mortgage applications and term sheets and sales and purchase agreements, right? And the utility of Word goes up, but every person pays $50. So where does that extra value, right, additional value has been created, where does it get reflected? It gets reflected in the market cap of Microsoft, right? And Microsoft for a long time was the most valuable company in the world because it had an install base of operating systems that let it sell other things in, right? Because it gained the network effect, it got reflected in its market cap. We have had the evolution of peer-to-peer marketplaces, Airbnb, Uber, et cetera, right? But that's only exacerbated the problem because with the benefits of social, local, and mobile, we've been able to achieve the same sort of network effect natural monopolies much faster, right? Even worse, right? And so we believe that with these decentralized software platforms, with these tokenized digital consumer utility tokens, and also with security tokens, that we can start to distribute the value of the network effect into the network itself, right? So the idea, Union Square Ventures, got to give them credit for this quote, if Uber had been built on Ethereum, the riders and drivers would have participated in the value creation, not just Travis, right? And that probably would have led to a better outcome for the company as well, right? But what that means is as a software entrepreneur or a software investor, this has profound implications for the next generation software ecosystems, right? It has a profound implication, potentially, on the future structure of software markets, right? This isn't just about building blockchains. This has ramifications for all of software and for how to start any software company, whether it's in blockchain or not, right? So with that, I'll wrap up. our belief is, because of the benefits the software brings, because of how it will restructure the value creation network in software, because of the benefits of having a globally secure distribution layer, that this technology will impact everything. And the way we help achieve that as ConsenSys is through this process of working with everybody. Whether it's a crypto startup or world's largest governments and financial institutions, whether it's educating developers in India or whether it's running strategy workshops for telecoms, our role and our goal is to help achieve this transformation to build fairer and better systems for the planet. So I think we're out of time. I think lunch is next, so I'm happy to stick around for a few minutes for questions. But thank you very much.